Well, boils and ghouls, it's your old pal, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And I want to welcome my good fiends of the Horror Heals podcast. Is horror good for mental wellness? But of course it is. I delight in the delicious deaths of pitiful people on the silver screen. So get ready for a hell of a good time with my new fiends, Corey and Kendall, on the Horror Heals podcast.
Welcome back, Horror Heliacs. If you thought last episode's conversation with Troy Taylor was fascinating, well, buckle up, because now we're diving into some of the most intriguing aspects of his life and work, his museum and its incredible collection of oddities, artifacts, and history. Troy has curated a one-of-a-kind space filled with everything from Houdini memorabilia to haunted dolls and sideshow relics. The first thing I saw when I visited the website was his display for the movie Freaks by Todd Browning, one of my favorites, and we certainly get into that. All right, let's talk to Troy. So let's talk about your museum. The first image that I saw when I got on the site was a display from the Todd Browning movie Freaks, which is one of my favorites. Immediately, I'm like, oh, next trip back.
Yeah, and I'm going to be working on that over the winter and expanding that section too. The idea was, I had, as I mentioned earlier, all these uncles and things. And so I had family that traveled carnivals in the summer. And so when I was 10, 11, I went along a couple of times and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So I've always just been fascinated with circuses and fairs and carnivals and sideshows. Obviously, the sideshows were on their way out when I was a kid, but there was still some stuff around. There still are a few things, but not the way it used to be. I just became fascinated with the whole culture of all of it. I always thought I would love to have some kind of museum. I never really thought I would, but I have been collecting so many weird things for so long. I run across them, I buy them, and I, store them. This is why I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I put them on display in my house and then never invite anyone over. So no one ever saw this stuff. There was a torture museum that used to be in the Mineral Springs in Alton, and it had closed. A friend of mine had taken it over and wanted to get out of it. I said, I will buy all the cases, all the stuff, take over the space, everything. As long as you don't have a problem with anything, I don't continue with the museum. Like, oh, I don't care. Whatever you buy, it's all, you do whatever you want with it. So I threw away 90% of the stuff that was in there. It was just fake torture things and stuff. And it was not my thing. And then took the space and took all the cases and everything else, and then just moved all that stuff out of my house into the museum. So now I've got a museum I've got a lot of spiritualist stuff and Ouija boards and things. I've got Houdini artifacts. I've got all this true crime stuff. I've got different pieces from Ed Gein's house. It's stuff. I've got stuff. There's a medical section. There's haunted dolls. I've got a full skeleton from a Knights of Pythias lodge is abandoned, and they found the skeleton hidden in one of the closets. They used it for one of their initiation things, but it's an actual human skeleton. And then I've got tons of funeral stuff and odd things. It's just stuff I'd been collecting. And now that I've got it in here, I've gotten more and more stuff since then. It gave me the chance to do something kind of like this movie ever gets made. As the 12-year-old boy in me will jump up and down. And so that's kind of how I was when I opened this museum. Oh my God, I finally have my sideshow. Even though it's not, what they were, but it sort of is. That's all I ever wanted was something. So I don't know. I sound like I'm going to die. This all sounds bad. Like you've achieved your dreams. Your life is over. No, but it is fun. And I have a lot of unusual things. And I do have there's a whole cabinet dedicated to Freaks, the movie, and all the performers that appeared in it. I've got another case dedicated to a lot of the performers. I've got the original photo cards that some people used to sell to make extra money when they would do their performances. A lot of Tom Thumb stuff from the 1860s. Some of his cards, rings from some of the giants. There's a Robert Wadlow display on the way in the Alton section. So I don't put him, to keep with his wishes when he was alive, I do not put him with the sideshow stuff. He is his own space outside with the Alton stuff. And, but yeah, I've always been fascinated with the film as well. And tell everybody the good news is here's all these performers from the circus sideshows from the 1930s in real life. The bad news is that after they did this movie, that ended sideshows because people freaked out about it in a completely wrong way and were shocked and appalled, even though they're the same people that were paying a quarter to see these people at the carnival. But, you know, and I try to explain to people, yes, a lot of them did have horrible lives and were badly mistreated and abused. And is it right to be staring at people because they have an anomaly? No. But where else were a lot of these guys going to find a job in the 1930s? You got a third arm coming out of your chest. You don't go work behind the counter at the drugstore. It just doesn't happen. So a lot of those people did the best they could with what they had, like Tom Thumb, Charles Stratton, became very, very wealthy. T. Barnum a couple of times when Barnum ran out of money. And this was the guy who got him started. So, you know, I'm not in favor of bringing back freak shows. Don't misunderstand me. I just want people to understand why a lot of these performers did what they did and why they were put on display. And that's always been the goal behind that part of it, you know, is these people considered us the freaks because we came and looked at them. So you got to understand that we're the opposite of what this implies. But yeah, the museum has been a blast. It really has. It has been probably one of the best things that I've come up with to do, but having it has been great. You definitely got to come by next time you're around.
For sure. So one more question on freaks, just because it's one that like pops up, you know, time and time again, that there's this notoriously cut half an hour of the movie, you know, because the movie's only an hour now. They made Todd Brown cut so much stuff out. Through your research, do you think we'll ever see that missing footage?
Some of it was found because some of it was put back because the ending was when we see the beautiful trapeze girl who was behind this murder plot all along, and they've turned her into the bird woman. Originally, that was cut out because audiences were fainting and stuff. So that's been put back in. And there was a Blu-ray edition that came out earlier this year of 3 Todd Browning films, including that one, I believe The Unknown, the one with Lon Chaney. Some of the footage is back in that too, but not all of it. I don't think we'll ever see all of it. I think we're going to be waiting for that like we wait for London After Midnight, which I heard, and I've never heard anything else about it. I ran across an article not that long ago that somebody thought they had it. They had most of the footage, but if they did, I haven't seen it pop up. I would love to see it. I've got the script and stills from the movie, and they put it in the script, which was pretty awesome. But I would love to see that film. I guess you could go watch Mark of the Vampire, but it's not the same. I want to see Chaney doing it. I don't know if we'll ever see that either, but it's something to keep our fingers crossed about.
Yeah, I mean, we've been surprised in the past of stuff that's found somebody's basement or...
You know, some of the King Kong stuff that they found that was put back in, the early Frankenstein stuff that they made him cut, you know, that stuff showed back up. So who knows? It'd be great if it did, though. It really would.
So you mentioned Alton, and we'll always have a special place in our hearts. We love that town. What is it about Alton and the whole paranormal haunt thing that sticks with you?
Marketing. But you know, it's true, though. We've become known to people who don't know anything else about Alton. If you say you're from Alton, and like say you're on vacation, and you go, oh, I live in Illinois, near St. Louis, and where at? And I say, oh, in Alton. Oh, that's the place with all the ghosts. These are people who don't know anything about ghosts, and they'll bring that up because we have publicized it and pushed the fact that it is one of the most haunted small towns in America. Not the most haunted small town, but one of the most. And that's what people remembers. But I wouldn't push it if it wasn't true. And I wouldn't go around saying it just to make a cool thing to say. We really do have a lot of ghost stories here. And that's because we have a lot of history here. And I'm constantly always explaining that to people, that there's nothing magical about it. It's not limestone and water mixed at just the right amounts. And, you know, it all has to do with everything that's happened here. One of the history that we have and the fact that we're not afraid to promote that fact that we have ghost stories. And a lot of towns don't want that as their thing. And we've worn them down the tourism bureau here. It took years, but we finally wore them down to understand how many people come here just because of the ghost stories or the places that are haunted. They come from all over the country. I joke and I say, what makes Alton so haunted? I say, oh, good marketing. It's a joke, but it's also true. It is good marketing because we're just telling something that's actually happening. When you add up epidemics, diseases, violence, murder, riverboats, crime, civil war, the prison, all of it, it's just so much pounded into one spot over so long that, you know, there's no good ghost stories without history behind it. They just don't exist. I mean, yeah, you can tell stories about waking up and seeing your grandma standing at the end of the bed, but that's, who cares? No one cares but you and your dead grandma. That's it. But in a case like, well, you know, we've got this penitentiary that used to sit here, and after it closed down, you know, it was in the newspapers at the time. Here's the articles, you know, of people saying that they're seeing ghosts there and hearing things. That's 150 years ago. They were already talking about Alton being haunted. Look how much more time has gone by and all these other things that have happened. That's the key, is all the history here in Alton, and we're not afraid to share it. I think that's one of the things. And it's just a cool town. I've been up and down the Mississippi, and there's a lot of cool river towns, but this one stands out. The way the town was built on the bluffs, a lot of them aren't like that. They'll be just on the top of the bluff or just at the bottom. The town always reminds me of Galena. Galena is another cool Mississippi river town because it's built all over the bluffs. Galena does, but it's a neat town. So is Alton, and there's a lot of similarities there. They've got their ghost stories too, for the same reason, all that history. I think that's what makes Alton so cool, is our past. It's not all great, obviously, but when you're talking about ghost stories, you can definitely use the bad parts to your advantage.
Well, it's funny that this came up as a question from Corey, because now we live relatively close to Salem, Mass, and we enjoy going, and Corey probably more than I do, because it feels touristy.
I wrote a book about witchcraft in America. You start the book where you're introducing things, but there were plenty of witch trials before Salem, but that's the one everyone knows. It wasn't just about Salem. It was about the history of witchcraft and voodoo and folk magic and how it came from other places and became Americanized when it got here. It all changed. I kind of concluded the book with the same thing that happened to Salem. Witch tourism in Salem is relatively new. They were pretty ashamed of it. What really turned witchcraft into mainstream in America was Bewitched, the TV show. And then Bewitched did that 2-part episode that they filmed in Salem. And then people started coming there because they saw it on TV, they started coming, and then the city, and this was in the 70s, so it's not that long ago, finally started to embrace all this witch stuff, and it is super commercialized now. But it's great for business. People come from all over the country because they want to visit Salem, even though they never hanged a single witch there, because none of them are witches, but that's okay because now there are witches there, and it just all kind of turned around. It was really interesting.
To your point, I love saying that I've been there, even if it's still Salem. I just have an affinity for Alton because of its size. It is interesting because it is a smaller town. You don't think about the subways in relation to the witchcraft in Salem. It's a very different vibe.
It definitely is. It's funny because when I travel someplace and I'll be talking to somebody and you say you're from Alton, and if they've been there, they're like, oh, I just go across the bridge and I get this creepy vibe. And I'm thinking, okay, so you're one of my customers. Let me tell you about Alton. I don't get a creepy vibe from it, but it's definitely a unique town. When you are coming across the Clark Bridge and you see it laid out there, all the way across in front of you with the river and the bluffs and everything, you're looking at that and thinking, it is a neat looking town. It's a very cool place. And I think that's one of the appeals. People keep coming back. We've been doing the Haunted America conference in Alton. We started in 99, left for a while, but came back. I get people from all over the country year after year because we have an Alton, and they love Alton. And we were going to have to move to a bigger venue, and then instead we just found a bigger one in Alton, in Godfrey. We just went to Lewis and Clark because we needed more room, and it's close enough. People really love this town. And I think that while even those of us who live here complain about it because it's our town, but I don't want to hear someone else complain about it. Don't complain about Alton. You don't live here, Yeah, it's only fair.
Absolutely. And Kendall will be the first to tell you, I am a marketer, professional marketer, but Kendall will tell you that I'm also a marketer's dream.
Yes. Yes.
But I've got a lot of fond memories working there for almost a decade. The one time that I feel I did have a potential paranormal experience was in the cellar of the McPike Mansion. It was just me and the owner of the house at the time. She was on one side of the room, I was on the other, and I swear something touched my shoulder.
Yeah. I had an experience, and it's been years ago, when you could still just go through the house to get down to the basement. You didn't have to come in from the outside. I had a group of friends visiting, and there were 7 or 8 of us. Yeah. So we were going to go down into the wine cellar, and a friend's wife had come down, and she's like, "Oh, it's too claustrophobic down here for me. How do I get out of here?" A friend of mine said, "Oh, I'll take you out." And so they left the cellar, went upstairs. We could hear them, went outside. And then a couple minutes later, we heard my friend come back in. We could hear footsteps, came down the stairs, came over to the door across the cellar and opened up that metal door, which scrapes on the floor. And the door's just standing open, but she didn't come in. Like, what? Hey, what are you doing? We go out and look. There's no one in the basement. A couple minutes later, she came down, and it's like, why are you all looking at me like that? Did you just come down a minute ago? No, I just came back in. We heard clearly, the whole group of us heard somebody walk down and that door opened up. That was my McPike wine cellar experience. And, I'm not a psychic. I always tell, I don't see dead people. I am not psychic at all. But sometimes, things happen that you're not, you do this long enough and you go to enough places, something's going to happen. And I've had plenty of experiences. So, I'm definitely a believer. I just don't believe everything that I'm told or hear, but I'm a believer in the concept for sure. We've had things in the museum. We had this one doll who would not stop moving. That's a true story. So we're trying to get this place open, and we have this doll named Sam, and we had him in one of the cases and kept coming in the next day as I was working, just trying to get this thing ready. So there was no customers, no anybody. I was the only person coming in, and we have a camera on the hallway. You can't go in without being seen. He would either be laying over, laying on the doll next to him, slumped forward, or turned halfway around. So I bought this metal stand with a big hook on it and put him on the stand and hooked it around him so he couldn't move. He was still rotating. I'm not joking. So I'm like, oh, we got to do something about this. So I took him out of that case and I put him in his own glass and wood sense. So I don't know if he mentioned, or I have no idea, or, what was going on. I'm not going to say I think the doll is, possessed or something, but it was weird. It was very weird. And works for me on the weekends, and he runs a museum. He helps me out with stuff, but he's not like a ghost guy. He didn't know much about any of this before he started helping out with the museum and sometimes with the tours. I'll get text messages from him in the middle of the day. Listen, there's nobody in here and something's moving. I can hear somebody walking. It's that kind of stuff. He gets freaked out too and doesn't want to be in there when it's time to go. He shuts the lights off and he's out of there. It kind of makes a believer out of people sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love having those. I had a deja vu moment going back to the McPike Mansions a few years ago. My good friend Rachel and I were at Universal Studios for my birthday. We were doing the trolley tour, and here's a lesson, kids. You catch more flies with honey. We were chatting up the tour guide because he was a fun guy, and he'd been taught acting by Sid Haig, and he had a lot of cool stories. They were starting to set up for their Halloween stuff. We went by the Psycho house, which was used in Psycho 2. But we didn't stop. And a lot of times they will stop. We talked to the guide. We're like, oh man, it's such a bummer. We really wanted to get a picture in front of the Psycho house. And he's like, after the tour's over, stand over here. Maybe 5 minutes. We had a van come get us, take us to the Psycho house. So it was just us. Got to take photos, in and around it. And then we got to walk inside. The facade inside, and it was not a real house, but totally reminded me of the first time I walked inside the McPike. It just had the same vibe. And so only other time that I've taken photos, took, photos of the Pike Mansion, of course, seeing orbs on there, took photos of the Psycho house, and there were orbs right around Mother's window.
All the movie studios are haunted, if that makes you feel any better. They all used to be something else.
Right. So just curious, because this is sort of timely in that yesterday we did our first official photo shoot for the podcast. And we were in the town where H.H. Holmes was born, who's considered America's first serial killer. Is there anything from his in your collection or in the museum?
Yeah, I've got some brick from the foundation of the castle, which the post office was built on top of. It's still the same foundation. So we've got some bricks. And his story is in there. I do presentations on him periodically anyway. And I've always been really fascinated with that story. We have a podcast or a Patreon and then a podcast that's separate from our regular one. I did a full season of just H.H. Holmes. I just love that story. Getting to the bottom of a lot of the stuff that has gotten blown out of proportion over time. No matter how you look at it, he was an evil serial killer, even if he didn't kill hundreds of people like they claim. But it doesn't matter. It's plenty of people. And the dude was completely depraved. I mean, well, he didn't even... And, you know, the funny thing is, and I don't see, this is what happens. You get me off on a tangent, and here we go. But, you know, the big thing about him being Jack the Ripper and stuff, none of that makes any sense. I mean, we've got actual evidence that shows he was in Chicago during the Whitechapel murder, so there's no way he could have done it. It sells people buy their commercials and for people to watch it, but it's not realistic. But the guy was not like this drooling madman. He was devious, and he murdered people because he wanted their money, or they were inconvenient to him because they might know his secrets, or they just were in the way. And so he had no conscience. It wasn't that he was just this driving need to murder people. It was the fact that he just didn't care. Human life meant nothing to him. He always had a motive, and his motive was mostly greed. And so he's a different kind of serial killer than he's been painted to be. Still a killer, still evil, but just not the same as this guy who just wants to go around murdering women. He's not the BTK killer here. It's just a guy who did it because it was convenient for him. I think that makes it almost scarier, because this is a guy who just didn't care about anything, had no feelings at all. He was a true psychopath, did not care about anyone. That's almost scarier than somebody like Ed Gein, you know, who everybody, you know, paints as he's not a serial killer because he only killed 2 people that we even know of. But this was a guy who didn't even try to cover anything up. He didn't even bother to try. He left all the clues behind. Took him, like half an hour to catch him after he killed Bernice Warden. This is a guy who was completely off his rocker, which obviously makes him frightening, but a guy who steals and kills with no compunction about it, no guilt, no anything. That's really scary, because look how long it took people to catch him, you know, before people even caught on to what he was doing. But yeah, I wish that they would make that H.H. Holmes movie that they could on and off again. For a while, it was Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio. Yeah. Then it was Keanu Reeves and all this stuff, but then it gets dropped again. I think it would make a fantastic film. I can't believe it still hasn't been made. I mean, it's a natural. From what I've heard, selling period pieces in Hollywood right now is not easy. Nobody wants them, which is too bad, because I love them, but that's just me.
Well, Troy, we really appreciate this, and I'm going to put you on the spot. I have a feeling as we continue the podcast, we're going to be getting into conversations with people that we might need your expertise on, just, you know, because there's going to be a lot of movies based on this and that, and you got this knowledge. We'd love to have you back on just to explain or dispel.
Yeah, no, I'd be thrilled to do it. Just keep me posted anytime. Seriously, anytime you need it, I'll work it out. I'm sorry I had to bump this one because of the move. I didn't know when I'd be moving when I set it up, and then I'm like, oh no, I don't even have my computer hooked up, you know? And so, no, that worked out great. But yeah, anytime, just let me know. I'm happy to jump in whenever you need me.
So we do have a question that we ask, the final question we ask for every guest. Who is your favorite person in a horror movie?
That is a good question. I guess I would have to go with Ripley in the original Alien. I think Sigourney Weaver, I think I'm probably not alone in sharing that sentiment. The original Alien is one of the scariest horror films of all time. It's painted as sci-fi, but that's a horror movie. There's no question. And I think that if they just listened to the woman in the first place, you know, so, but they didn't. And so we got all that mess. But I think in Aliens as well, in the sequel, she's even better. We have to stop there because 3's okay, 4's horrible. So I don't even want to talk about them, but I do love her. I would have to name her as my favorite final person. So, I mean, I've probably got 20. If I sat here long enough, I could just keep coming up with them. But that's off the top of my head, number one I go to. That's it. So.
I don't think Ripley's been said yet, but we're going to keep a tally going. It's been very interesting which direction people are going and their reasoning why. I think pretty fascinating. Troy, your museum sounds like a dream and maybe just a little bit of a nightmare in the best way possible. From haunted dolls to sideshow history, it's like walking into a cabinet of curiosities brought to life. Listeners, make sure to check out the museum if you're in the Alton area. It's not to be missed. And speaking of Alton, Illinois, your insight into what makes it such a paranormal hotspot, beyond the good marketing, was eye-opening. It's so much more than ghost stories. It's the layers of history, the sense of place, and how the community embraces it. And for everyone listening, don't forget to check out the show notes for links to Troy's books, museum, and more. And remember, when someone asks, is horror good for mental wellness? You tell them, of course it is. The Horror Heals podcast is produced and presented by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.